Welcome everybody. We are going to be looking today about 27 ways that Christ turned followers into leaders. We are here because we recognize that leadership is the skill of influence, nothing more, nothing less. Every man, woman, and child has influence. But the question is, are we using that influence to lead others to Christ? So today, in this leadership table where we are able to get together and study about these different aspects of leadership and grow to be able to use our influence to help others to come closer to Christ. We're going to be looking at this study that was put together because we're asking the question, who's the greatest leader that this world has ever known? And it's Christ. What is the number one most influential book that has ever been written? It's the Word of God, the Word of Christ. So if we follow his example, then he is going to be the best leader that we can learn insights and gains. One thing that's really incredible about the life of Christ is that out of anyone in the world, he has developed the most leaders out of any other leader on the planet. So there's something about something about the way that he saw followers, not as who they were, but who they could become by his grace. And it's so encouraging because when we look in our lives, we have the opportunity to look at followers or look at others, and we can see the leadership potential in them before they see it in themselves. So today's leadership table, we're going to be discussing how are we able to take someone who says, I'm not a leader, I'm a follower, or someone who doesn't really see themselves yet. How can we take a follower and turn them into a leader by looking at these examples of Christ? So the first thing, this is actually a continuation. We've covered 1 through 7 already in a previous 2 weeks ago, but we're going to be looking at number 8 and onward. So the 8th way that Christ, 8 out of 27, taught his followers is that their leadership development is not dependent upon circumstances. This is really key. Did I spell circumstances right?
No, 2R.
There's not 2R?
No. You're kind of probably like curriculum.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was spelling. What do you say, Kamran?
I said it looks like curriculum stances.
Okay. Sir.
I don't know how to spell. Here, let me look it up for you.
Is it like this?
Sir.
C-I-R.
C-I-R.
C-U-M.
C-I-R-C-U-M. Stances, like that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, he taught that that our leadership development is not dependent on circumstances. Let's look at his example. I love this verse. Go to John chapter 1 and verse 45. So this is powerful stuff. John 1:45. Can I get a volunteer to read this for us? John chapter 1 verse 45. All right, thanks, brother.
So Philip findeth Nathanael, and saith unto him, We have found him, of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph.
And 46.
And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip saith unto him, Come and see.
So, in what circumstances did Jesus develop his leadership abilities?
He invited people.
In the wicked.
What did the verse just say?
Nazareth. Nothing could come out of Nazareth.
Yeah.
Can come out of Nazareth.
Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? See, Nazareth had a reputation. Nazareth was a wicked city that people that there wasn't a lot taking place or coming out of that. There was some serious opposing circumstances to the development of his character. He spent nearly 30 years in Nazareth, growing and developing as a man after God's own heart. And so this is really encouraging to realize that this fact is a rebuke to those who think themselves dependent upon place, upon fortune, or prosperity in order to live a blameless life. But temptation, poverty, adversity, these are the very discipline that is needed to develop purity and firmness. It is through opposing circumstances that we develop as leaders. So let's look at another example. Let's go to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16. How did Christ turn his followers into leaders? Matthew 10:16. Can I get a different volunteer to read this one for us? All right, Mom, go ahead.
Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves.
So if you were a sheep in the middle of a pack of wolves, is that favorable circumstances or unfavorable?
That's pretty unfavorable.
Are those opposing circumstances?
No.
Absolutely.
Well, if you don't have God behind you.
Well, they're opposing circumstances even if you have God. But obstacles are not impossibilities with God. And I want you to see that all throughout the scriptures, this was Christ's method of turning followers into leaders. The opposing circumstances that you see in life, these are your preparation for greater responsibilities. A lot of times when we are coming to these leadership tables, there's going to be some things that come up in our schedule, in our life, and distractions, and they're going to try to prevent your growth. You're going to seek to develop in the different talents that you have for Christ, and there's always going to be challenges. There's going to be internal struggles. There's going to be external struggles. There's going to be things that are seeking to prevent you from drawing closer and strengthening these skills. But we have to recognize that when you start training your brain to look at opposing circumstances as opportunities for growth, then you start to grow tremendously. Then you start to enlist in the school of Christ, and you're developing as a leader. Let's look at this, another example, in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 20. Matthew chapter 17 and verse 20. What did Jesus teach we needed in order to overcome our difficulties? Matthew 17:20.
I like this verse.
Matthew 17:20. Tina, could you read this for us? And also, for those who are joining us on Discord, feel free to unmute yourself. If you want to say something, you're welcome to read or volunteer as well. Or ask a question. Go ahead, Tina. Matthew 17:20.
Alright, it says, And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief. For verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence to yonder place, and it shall be removed. And nothing shall be impossible unto you.
It's really powerful. You know, I used to read this for a long time. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, there's mountains being cast in the sea with faith. It's like, is that like a physical mountain that is like could literally be removed and thrown into the water?
Well, maybe. But it's
Sure.
a little more.
Definitely.
So, one thing that I found in searching through the CD-ROM, I found again and again, it was describing mountains of difficulty and turning mountains into molehills. And these phrases of, like, what I have concluded and seen is that this is connected. Now, there's like different layers of the scriptures, but I've found that one of the applications is that these are obstacles, these are difficulties, these are the things in our life that seem so when you look at the principles, when you're climbing a mountain and you're at the base, that sounds pretty intense, right? It could be daunting. It could be overwhelming. It could be you're seeing your characters the defects that you have to overcome. You're seeing the new skills that you have to develop. You're seeing the new things in order to go from where you are to where Christ wants you to be. You understand that gap and the different steps to get there. It seems so overwhelming because there's so much new territory and it seems like an uphill climb. And a lot of times growth is, it seems almost impossible. Mm-hmm. But God is saying that what is the one thing that we need in order to have nothing to be impossible to us? Faith. What kind of faith?
Faith is the victory.
There's a grain of a mustard seed.
How big is a grain of a mustard seed?
Wee little.
It's just a little tiny thing. And how big does a mustard plant turn into when it grows?
Huge tree.
Biggest herb.
The biggest herb. Interesting. Yeah. So it really shows that, like, I think a quote that Henry Ford said was interesting. If you think you can or think you can't, you're absolutely right. A lot of times we accomplish little because we attempt little. But we attempt little because we don't really believe that we can actually do it. And on the flip side, you know, in James chapter 2, it says, faith without works is dead, being alone. But also, works without faith is dead also. Sometimes we could be doing a work, we can be taking on a new skill, and we could be saying the whole time, I don't know how to do this, this is so difficult, this is complicated, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't understand. How many times do we accept defeat before we ever even attempt? We look at, maybe it's learning a new technology, learning a new tool, learning a new platform, or even getting on Discord, or it could be just the call of opportunity is given to us to serve Christ, to use our talents for Him. Maybe we're a singer, maybe it's to lead out in prayer and testimony, or whether it is to lead out in a small group, or whatever the case may be. We're given an opportunity and all we see is obstacles. And we're like, I can't do it. But you're believing, if you say you can't do it, then you really can't. The impossibility lies in our own will. But it's not because of the circumstances. You see, circumstances don't shape the man, but the man shapes his circumstances. Leaders use circumstances as instruments to work. They see the opposing difficulties and they step on them so they can climb higher. This is the mindset that Christ was teaching His disciples to be able to grow through the means of opposing circumstances. And when we realize this, I mean, you'll see it all throughout the scriptures. What I like to do is whenever I see an obstacle, there's a phrase that comes through my mind that just obstacles are not impossibilities. And once I realized that, it opens your mind immediately to see possibilities. Obstacles are not impossibilities. So the second thing that Christ did to turn followers into leaders is He developed the faults and mistakes of His followers.
What do you mean by that? He developed the faults and the mistakes.
Yep.
It sounds like he
Developed them in a better way.
He developed them. So let's go to, what do I mean by that? Let's go to Titus chapter 2. We're going to read in verse 11. Titus chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. Can I get another volunteer to read? Someone who hasn't read yet? Titus chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. How did Christ handle the faults and mistakes of others? Especially of his followers, in reference to turning them into leaders. Titus chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. Someone who has not read.
I can read.
Thank you, Vicky. I appreciate that.
For the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that, denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world.
Great. So God's grace is an educator. It takes leaders where they are, but He doesn't keep them that way. God has chosen His leaders not because they're perfect, but it's notwithstanding their imperfections, that through the knowledge and practice of the truth, through the grace of Christ, the leaders may become transformed into His image. Christ saw the faults and the mistakes, and He gave them opportunities so they can develop and strengthen and educate and deny ungodliness and worldly lust. Does that make more sense, Tina?
Yeah.
I like the way that it's put in. Actually, let's look at Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 20. How did Christ handle the mistakes and faults of others? Matthew 12 verse 20 and 21. Can I get another volunteer to read these two? I can start calling on people.
Sure.
Matthew 12 verse 20 and 21. Theodora, could you read this for us?
Matthew what?
Matthew 12 verse 20 and 21. How did Christ handle the mistakes and faults of others?
20 to 21.
Yes, please.
A bruised reed shall he not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory. And in his name shall the Gentiles trust.
So what does that mean, Theodora? A bruised reed shall Christ not break, and a smoking fire shall He not quench.
He will encourage any small efforts that comes from people.
Yeah.
Someone
Go ahead.
Someone who's already like struggling, He's not going to break them down further, but He's going to encourage them and heal instead of like break down further.
Yeah. It's like the difference between encouragement and criticism, or appreciation,
Or a stern, talk.
Or rebuke.
Say the same thing in a gentle tone.
Yeah. When trying to change people, or when in leadership, we're often needing to develop the character, like the character traits that we have, but also developing the character of others. Because it's not about just ourselves, that's the first step. But we also want to consider the things of others. We want to help develop those around us by using our influence. So we realize that we have gnarled, we have thwarted and wrong character that's rough in different edges. But as leaders, we have to be able to discern in others what are the areas that are rough and help to smooth them out. We need to be intentional about the areas of weakness and not discourage the bruised reed, not to quench the smoking flax. If there's any spark of interest in their development as a leader, if there's any spark of interest in their development and their talent of speech, of time, of communication, of learning, or whatever it is, people are hard on themselves enough. A lot of times our conscience weighs us down, or we're constantly criticizing. A lot of times we're our own worst critic, and the accuser of the brethren is speaking in our ears about our faults and our failures, our mistakes, and how we can't go forward. They don't need someone else to go in and criticize people for what they're doing. When people are doing things that we don't like, it's not the time to criticize and to nag and to rebuke and to be saying like, hey, what happens is what gets rewarded gets repeated. When people are doing even small efforts, then as we recognize those small efforts, as we start cultivating the habit of speaking well of others, and we start encouraging what good things that people are doing, then they'll do more of it. People, criticism is like desolating hail on a tender plant, but sincere, honest appreciation is like warmth and sunshine and rain that helps to flourish and grow the tender plant. And in Christ was extremely intentional about who he was speaking to. He didn't just pay attention to what they said, he listened to the heart. And he was seeing, how can I help this person to advance, to develop? How can I get them to the next step based on where they're at? He adapted his message based on the needs of his hearers. Whether there were 10, whether there was 10,000, or there was one. Jesus had a faithful regard for the one soul audience. So I want to challenge you as leaders to recognize your work as not just identifying character defects, but seeking to develop the faults and mistakes of others. This is a skill that we have the privilege and duty to commit to. How can we develop the characters of others and helping them? Because the secret of overcoming is what?
Helping somebody overcome.
Helping others overcome. So this is how God designed for us to find victory as well. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 24, verse 16.
You can write that on the board.
Yeah, I can do that. Proverbs 24, 16. And I would like a new volunteer to read this one. Proverbs 24, 16.
You're always in search for new volunteers.
Yeah, it's because we have so many able bodies here.
Amen.
But I want to ask, in order for us to develop the faults and mistakes of others, we have to change the way that we look at mistakes. We have to change the way that we look at these failures. And when we change, then those around us will change. It will change the way we interact with others.
It has to. It has to.
Yes. So, can I get a volunteer to read Proverbs 24:16? Who is? Yes. Who is it that makes mistakes or experiences failures? It's like, what does the Bible say about those who have fallen? Matthew 24:16. Kathy, can you read it for us? No. Oh, Leah, I see. Thank you, Leah. See, you're unmuted, but I don't hear anything coming out.
Aww.
It's a bummer. What about Sister Angela? Are you able to read for us? Trying to get some new people to read for us. Matthew 24, verse 16.
Verses. I wonder why we can't hear them.
Is it something with our audio? I can't tell who's speaking because I can't join. If I join, it'll disconnect from the desktop.
Testing. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear. So maybe it's Angela's and Leah's. Vicky, would you like to read the verse for us?
Sure. For
Thank you.
a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief.
So what type of person makes the mistakes and falls?
A just man.
A just man. So do we want to be justified before God?
Yes.
Christ recognized in his followers that they had some serious issues. I mean, when you look at the disciples, they all had serious faults when they were called for service. You look at Levi, Matthew, he was a publican, and they were known for a lot of shady practices financially. You have Simon, he was a fiery zealot, and he was uncompromising in his hatred towards the authority of Rome. You see Peter, although he was generous, he was very impulsive, he was rash. See Judas, he was very mean-spirited. Thomas, though true-hearted, yet he was very timid and he was fearful. Philip, he was slow of heart and inclined to doubt. And James and John, they were ambitious to be first, the sons of Zebedee. They were the sons of thunder. They were violent. You see, a lot of the 12, they were called not because they had all these perfections and they were the greatest leaders of all time, but Jesus saw that through His grace, He could develop the faults and failures and mistakes of His disciples. And you see, there's such a wide variety of different dispositions and beliefs and mentalities within the 12. So the way that you deal with Peter, who is rash and impetuous and quick, is not the same way you deal with John or the same way that you deal with Thomas. They have unique faults and failures. So we have to have a unique message as we're conversing with the followers, with the leaders, with the people that are on our team. We have to speak to them as an individual who they are in Christ, recognizing their unique individuality. And when we do this, it makes a tremendous difference. But we have to realize too that mistakes, we need to reframe what mistakes are in our minds. And we're encouraged. I really like this book. It's one of the best leadership books that I know of. It's called Child Guidance, page 130. And the reason why is because every time I read this book, I could just replace the word mother with the word leader and the word child with the word like follower or team member or someone in the sphere of influence. So when you're looking at principles, the whole book just comes alive and you can see these leadership principles and all throughout. But here's a phrase that says, let the child and the youth be taught. So in other words, let followers be taught, because children and youth, they follow the parents. Let followers be taught that every mistake, every fault, every difficulty conquered becomes stepping stones to better and higher things. It is through such experiences that all who have ever made life worth the living has achieved success. It's really a different mentality, because usually we think of mistakes and failures and faults as this is the meaning that we attach to these is that means I am a failure. Because I've made mistakes, that means I cannot succeed. But that's not what God is showing. He's saying, no, it's actually through overcoming these mistakes. It's having the faults, and by God's grace finding victory, that becomes a stepping stone. That's why the just man falls 7 times. But the difference, what was the difference between the just and the righteous?
They get up. Though they
The
fall, they do not. Wait. Though they fall, they do not.
They cast
down. They are not cast down. Yeah. So they stand back up.
Yes.
Yes.
The unrighteous, they just stay down. The wicked, they just like oh,
They
well, I
tend to
guess I don't know
wickedness.
how to do this, and then they get up.
Yeah.
They tend to wickedness. They just keep on going.
Yeah, they just fall.
Yeah.
And I realize that's been the case a lot of times in my own experience. I find that the times when I'm listening to the voice of the accuser of the brethren and saying, you've made a mistake, you've fallen, there's no point in getting up again, why even try, you're just going to fall again, and the same voice that happens, and then it just gets you discouraged. And when you give up, you're in this state of, it's not that you're falling, because you're not standing. The beautiful thing about the mistakes and failures is that means that you were standing. And if you were standing once, it means you can stand up again by God's grace. He can uphold you with the right hand of His righteousness. But we have to learn to look at the faults and mistakes. The meaning that we attach to these is when we fall, that means lessons, that means learning, that means progress. Because when we go to God and we ask for strength, and for lessons in education. Psalms 119:71 says, it is good for me that I be afflicted. Why? That I might learn thy statutes. So in our failures, we need to learn to ask ourselves, what is great about this situation? And a second question we can ask, what can I learn from this experience? And then we could see once we take these failures as learning experiences, we turn failure into victory. But the key is, once we do this for ourselves, it makes it easier. As we do it with ourselves, it makes it easier for us to do with those around us. And thus, you will be turning, like Christ, followers into leaders. Because this is what leaders do. Leaders look at failure differently. They look at failure differently in themselves and in the lives of others. Christ looked at failure differently. Why do you think he sent them through so many opposing circumstances? So they could fail. When you look at the entire, the first covenant, God made a covenant with mankind on Mount Sinai. And what was that covenant in Exodus 24? It says, all that the Lord would do. What did they say?
All that the Lord has said we will do.
Yeah, all that the Lord has said, we will do. Now, did the people live up to that promise, that covenant? No, they didn't. They were dancing around the golden calves, and they broke all 10 of the commandments as Moses smashed them on the ground. And so, did God know that man wasn't able to keep that covenant?
Mm-hmm.
So why did he allow them to form that?
So they could see their need.
So they can fail.
See
and
their helplessness.
And by failing, they could see their helplessness. They could see their need.
The same thing we still need. We need to see our helplessness.
Yeah, the whole purpose of the first covenant was it was through failure we can see our need and utter dependence upon God. And that's why our God is so loving. He didn't leave them with the first covenant. He gave a second, a new, an everlasting, which is really not new. It's been from everlasting. And that was that God was going to work through us and work with us. So this is really an amazing thing once you start realizing that God uses failure and experience as part of his education in the school of Christ. It's one of the classrooms of Christ, his textbooks. Yes?
How about in heaven? We're not going to be failing in heaven.
Amen. We're
Amen.
going to be so close to the Lord.
But you know what we will have in heaven? Our testimony.
Yeah.
And it's through sharing our testimonies with those around us. They're going to be learning through our failures and mistakes, because it is the cross of Christ alone that's going to guard from a second apostasy. Jana, you are unmuted and you have background noise. Would you be able to mute yourself, please? Unless you have something to share. But yes, in heaven we have the... Carmen, are you able to help handle when people are...
I'm helping her. I'm explaining to her what to do.
Oh, okay. Well, until then, Carmen can help. Thank you. So yes, in heaven, what's beautiful is before the fall, people have never heard a lie. They've never seen what failure can do, what sin, the damage that it causes into the world. But because of the fall, because of this, the fall of man and the redemption of man, now through the cross of Christ, it secures the universe from ever repeating that in the past again. But it's through the failure that all the universe learned the lesson of sin and salvation.
Yeah. Failure 101 is going to close soon.
Failure 101. Well, no, it's going to be our textbook throughout eternity. It is because of what...
Class is going to close.
Yeah, we're not going to be going through those experiences anymore.
Textbook will be there.
Yeah. Funny. So, the thing that I want to point out is that Christ saw the faults and failures, and he sought to develop these things in his disciples by giving them opportunity tailored to their need. And in like manner, if we want to turn followers into leaders, we're going to have to give others opportunities to develop their faults and failures, their faults and mistakes, according to their need. And when we do this, it'll make a tremendous difference. Yes?
It is pride that makes men run when they've fallen.
It's true.
And often the small children, when they fall and are hurt, they look for consolation, they look for comfort, they look to go to their parent or to the one that loves them.
Wow.
But as you get older and you believe that you shouldn't fall, and you shouldn't, but when you do, rather than going to others for comfort and consolation, it is often the desire to remove yourself or somehow, do other things other than the very thing of getting up and going back. And so, yeah, that's really a powerful thought. Rather than it being a stepping stone, get up and walk again, because small children are encouraged to get up after they've fallen and help them, and dust them off and, okay, let's try again.
Mm-hmm.
But as we get older and supposedly wiser, and then we fall, often instead of being encouraged after we've fallen, many are destroyed, and that fear makes them want to hide or destroy their own selves.
Wow. That's really powerful. I just saw a child who was misbehaving and throwing rocks when he shouldn't be doing that. And then, he threw a rock and I don't remember what happened, but he did something that was, above and beyond. And he's like, oh no. And he's just like, oh, I messed up. And then, meanwhile, his grandma was telling him, it's like, hey, get over here, stop doing that, come here right now. He was just running away and just avoiding everything until he did something that was so bad, and then he was just like, ugh. And while he was hiding before, then he just runs straight over to grandma. And I was just like, why did he do that? I was thinking, if I was that child, I'd be going the opposite direction. But it's like what you were just saying, it's pride. The children are so humble, and we have so many lessons of leadership that we can learn from the children before they learn that mistakes are things that they attach a new meaning. In false education, we get marked down for the mistakes and the things we get wrong. We get taught over and over that through these tests that it is having the wrong answer that they punish you for doing that. But what I've found is that I learn way more faster from the failures or the answers I got wrong than the answers that I got right. Those things stick with me and I never forget them again. I think Mom had her hand and then Pastor Smith.
Oh, I was just going to say that the children, they know who to run to.
Yeah.
And I think in our society that we're teaching the children to be, to do things on their own. So it has a lot to say about who you are when you make a mistake. And that's why people get so much pride going on. And that's bad.
Yes, thank you. Pastor Smith, would you like to share?
Yes. I was at a ministry one time, and one of the things that I saw was they had developed this culture when I got there that when the teacher would ask a question, if you didn't know the answer, it was that you should not answer and give a wrong answer.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, I would answer. Sometimes it would be wrong. They would look at me like I shouldn't do that. And I said, I don't care if I get it wrong. I just want to know if I can get it right.
Yeah.
And I rebuked that foolishness, because I looked at them and said, you learn many times better when you make a mistake. You'll learn better than if you never got anything wrong. And so, but anyway, I've seen that culture, that mindset being played out again and again. Of, I shouldn't answer because I might get it wrong.
Yes.
Rather than, even if I don't know, I want to know, and this is what I think. Am I right? Am I wrong? Why?
Yeah.
It's like gauging. If you don't do just something, you can't gauge where you're at. You don't know if you're doing good or if you're doing bad if you don't get something out there to look at.
Well, the mindset was, if you're not perfect, or if you don't have a perfect understanding, you should have no input.
Right.
And that is disastrous and dangerous. And that very ministry ended up going
south real fast, huh?
Well, it didn't go fast, but it definitely went south.
It's like the concept, children should be seen and not heard. It's like, don't speak unless spoken to. It's like, We're adults. We're having a conversation. You're a child. Go play. Go do something else, because your input is not welcome here. But as leaders, we have to recognize that we have to literally be intentional about creating a culture and environment where it's okay to make mistakes. That can only be done through trust. When you trust your team so much that you're like, look, you're here because you're the right person for the job. I trust you. You decide, and I'll support your decision. And even if there's a mistake, we have to be there not to chastise and shame and criticize and just remind them of their mistakes, but we have to be seen as a loving leader that they're able to come to during mistakes and say, okay, well, let's talk about it. What can we learn from this mistake? What can we, how can we do this differently next time? What would you have done differently had you been able to do it again? And if you're able to, as a leader, to develop the faults and mistakes of the individual, and they feel that trust and that love to go to you, then there's not going to be this like intense culture where everybody's like walking on eggshells, making sure that they're like not making any mistakes, and they're trying to be all this perfect facade. That it doesn't work that way. So, and something I learned recently was that failure is the most emotionally intense and the most dense way that we could experience and we could possibly learn from. There's a lot of different ways that we can learn. There's books, there's knowledge, there's testimonies, there's learning, there's classes, there's practice, there's so many different ways that we can learn, but failure is one of the fastest, most intense density ways that we can grow and learn and develop that I was realizing, wow, if you want a shortcut, then you could fail your way to success, and you could just learn every single time. And it's like one thing that I heard from Pastor Smith, I've never heard someone say that before, and it really stood out to me, is he mentioned, he's like, I'm not afraid of failure. And I heard that, I'm like, wow. He's like, I'm not afraid of failing. And you could just see that he's willing to go forward and make adjustments. He's willing to do, and then review, and then adjust, and then repeat. And I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. So since I first heard that, I adopted that. I'm like, yeah, I'm not afraid of failure. This is how I'm going to grow. And but since then, I began to realize, now I'm not suggesting that we go out and we purposely fail and do the wrong things, but you have to recognize there takes risk for growth. It takes trust to step out on a limb and make a mistake. But though we fall, we won't be utterly cast down. Christ is seeking to lift us up. And the more faster, quicker succession that we could pack into a short amount of time frame, you will learn and grow and develop far faster than if you don't take any risk and you just hide yourself in a box and you try to just stay really close and only go forward if you know for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that there'll be no chance of failure. You will fail. The very thing that you're afraid of, you will create because you were afraid of it. That's what Job said. That which I feared, it came upon me. Tina?
What you were sharing was what I heard in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. You know the story when this guy, I guess he was a mechanic, he was preparing planes for Yeah.
The pilot was Hoover, and there was a young man, a mechanic, yeah?
Yeah, and the mechanic by accidentally put
the wrong fuel in the plane.
The wrong fuel in the plane, and so they had to do, I don't know, I guess I don't know if they didn't really crash. Yeah,
it crashed. They were in the sky and they went out.
Okay, yeah.
And he had to do an emergency landing.
He had to do a crash landing.
Yeah.
And it almost killed 3 passengers.
Yeah, his life.
But anyways, and then so the mechanic was horrified, and he thought in his mind he would be fired and never again. But what the guy did was just put his arm around him and told him I want you to service my plane tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, I know that you're repentant of this, and it's and to show that I believe that you will never do this again, I want you to service my other plane tomorrow.
That is just such a powerful concept, because that is totally contrary to what people are used to.
Can you imagine how devoted he
Never
was
doing this
to?
again.
Never.
Yeah,
Never
you
touching
would
my car again.
never.
You're never touching my plane again. You will never work in this industry again.
That's pride that does that.
Mhm.
But
Imagine how that touched his heart and how devoted he would be to that
Oh,
guy
yeah.
because of that love he showed him.
That's key right there. It's so true. And Jesus said, to whom much is forgiven, loveth much. So it's that principle. And another story in that book, How to Win Friends, Influence People, it was stated that there was this guy, I think it was Andrew Carnegie, and just huge, massive mega company, one of the wealthiest people on the planet. He was working with this young man, and this young man had made a mistake that cost him over $1 million.
Back in the day was a lot of money.
And that would have been like way more today. It was huge.
Back in Ellen White's day.
Yeah, so it's not like don't quote me on the exact number, but it was massive. So he made that mistake, and and they're having this conversation, and the young man is just like, he knows he's going to get fired, and he knows that it's over with, and he just had so much remorse, and he was just like basically accepting his being fired and laid off. And Andrew Carnegie's like, what? He's like, no, there's no way I'm going to fire you because you've made that mistake. He said, you already made the $1 million mistake. It's like, I can't afford to lose you because you made the mistake. I know you're not going to do that again. And that I'm going to give you greater opportunities in the company to grow, because he realized that man, through forgiveness, is much greater value to the company because he's not going to do the same thing again, but some other young buck or new person could easily just repeat the same process. So, they both grew it, and they both became like more millionaires or whatever, but it was just recognizing that forgiveness and how we deal with the faults and mistakes of others will determine whether they develop or degrade. Which one do you want for those in your sphere of influence? Yeah. And we're never just being, we are always leading. In every conversation, in every scenario, we are influencing others. So this is a skill of handling faults and mistakes intentionally that we need to develop if we're going to reflect Christ's character. So I'll say we'll have this one last tip, so we could just have it 3. Christ turned followers into leaders by giving them opportunities that stretched their abilities. Christ stretched the abilities of his followers and made a profound difference. I'll give you some examples just real quick. Hopefully you're taking notes. Some of the ways that he did this is he sent out the 70 disciples in Luke chapter 10, and he sent them out before they had really the physical or the mental development to be able to go do that. On their first missionary endeavor, they made lots of mistakes, but they learned and grew from those mistakes. Christ sent out, time and time again, he gave them opportunities that stretched. Like, even look at Judas, Judas was a thief. Jesus knew that he had covetousness in his heart, and because of that, Jesus actually placed Judas as what position in the ministry?
Treasurer.
He was a treasurer. He in the book of John, it says he held the bag, the treasury. And Christ did that because it would stretch himself so that he might participate in unselfish acts of service financially that would help to stretch his abilities, that he might learn to overcome his defects. And time and time again, we see that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And one of the reasons is Hebrews chapter 5, I believe it's verse 14 or 12, it says that we might have our senses exercised by reason of use. By reason of use. Thank you. I'm glad you guys are listening. To have their senses exercised by reason of use. So exercise, the law of exercise is if you don't use it, you what? You lose it. So in like manner, exercise is connecting with stretching. You're stretching and pulling your muscles, and you're breaking and repairing, and we need to give people experiences that will stretch their abilities. And it's not enough if you just stay within your comfort zone and with your ability. But when you pull, you're able to go further than where you were at the beginning. But every time that you step out of your comfort zone gets bigger. So if you want a bigger impact, a bigger reach, a bigger influence with people and make a bigger difference, then we're going to have to continually step out of our comfort zone. So our comfort zone can get bigger. So but in order to stretch people, that requires trust, and it requires a relationship. Your followers need to trust you enough for your influence to stretch them. And when you are stretching people, it takes risk. This is a level 4 leader who develops people. It's a risk to stretch people and have them step out on a limb. But what they're doing is they are hanging on to the trust that they have in God and through you to take that next step, because you've encouraged them to do something they've never done, to grow in an area they've never grown, to go further, to faster than they ever thought possible. But this is our work, is to give them opportunity. But I caution you that when you stretch people and they fail and they fall and you're not there to support you, well, I'll say it like this: when you stretch people, you want to make sure that you are committing during the season of them stretching. You are going to be available to them. You're going to help them when they make a mistake and ask them questions through it. And you're going to be there, because if you're stretching people with your influence and you abandon them and you walk away, and they're trusting in you and they fall and you're not there to catch them or help them, then you just lost influence with that person.
And that person might not get back up.
Yeah, and there's a danger that they may not get back up.
And plus, doing that stretches you too. Because, I mean, it does. It's like Kathy was doing the dishes the other day, and then the little girl wanted to come and help. And that, like, slows you down a lot, and it's like, she might not do it right or whatever. And so Kathy needs to, stretch out her patience and her willingness to tolerate the inability that she has. Yeah. Which it turned out really good.
That's a blessing. Yeah. And sometimes we have to slow down in order for us to go faster. And we have to be patient with people, because by training that little girl, she'll grow, and she'll be able to wash dishes even without Kathy, or without a mother, or without someone else. But it makes a tremendous difference. So my encouragement to you is only stretch people if you want to strengthen your relationship with them, or help them to grow, or if you want to develop leaders. But if you don't want to develop leaders, don't stretch people, don't stretch yourself, and just keep everybody in their comfort zone. But this is going to stretch you, and this will help, just like Mom was saying. It's a blessing. So we're going over a series which is going through 27 ways that Christ turned followers into leaders. These were the 8. We already covered the first 7. And my encouragement to you is always look for things that you can act upon. What does the A stand for? Apply. What does the C stand for? Change. What can I change as a result of this? What is the third one? Teach. Who can you teach? I'll tell you, teaching is one of the best ways to learn. When you teach something, you get to learn it twice. The sooner you go from taking this and learning it and then sharing with others what God has shared with you, the sooner you're going to advance, you're going to grow. These things will solidify in your mind. And I'm going to encourage you too that this leadership tables is a resource for you. look, who do you know that is not here? Who do you know that is missing? Who do you know that you are seeking to stretch, that you are trying to help develop their abilities? And make sure they attend. Make sure that they come here. If they're not here in person, on Discord, then send them the replay afterwards. These are available for others. So this is a tool so that you can help to educate and develop those within your sphere of influence so they can grow and use their talents for Christ.
Amen.
So with that being said, if it's your desire to turn followers into leaders the way that Christ did, I invite you to close with me with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are very grateful for the privilege that we have to follow in your footsteps, and that you sent your Son to not only die for us, but to live for us, leaving us an example that in all things we can see what are the steps of turning followers into leaders. You've given us counsel in all areas of our life. Father, I pray that you'll help us to grow. Help us to change the way that we look at opposing circumstances and obstacles. Help us to see with the eye of faith the possibilities that are just before us. Help us to change the way that we see the mistakes and the failures. Help us to learn. Help us to ask. Not to conclude that this means that these are impossibilities that we can never grow or be different or fulfill your calling in our life, but simply that these are the lessons, these are the stepping stones that you have in fact given us to fulfill our calling in life. And as we look with the eye of faith, I pray that we can be more like you. And finally, I pray that you will stretch us and that you'll help us to give us the strength and the sacrifice to step out of our comfort zone, to take up our cross and follow you. Help us not to be content for living comfortably and at ease and only doing those things that are not difficult. Help us to do things that help us to grow into the men and women, the leaders that you have called us to be, the leaders that our families need, the leaders that our friends are literally perishing for the lack thereof. And I pray that we can use our influence to lead others to Christ. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
And for those who are watching on YouTube, I want to say thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, click like and share it with someone who you believe could be here. And you can subscribe to our channel because there's going to be more videos like this as well, and more trainings on how we can use our influence to lead others to Jesus. And remember that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called.